Hi guys, it's Randy with Direct Action Combat Performance, sitting here in the gym, the Westboro gym. Very happy to introduce you guys to Sam Batchelor, who's going to do her own personal introduction here in a second. But just so you guys are tracking, for those of you who have been watching it and following the YouTube channel with Direct Action, Sam has come on board about a year ago. Her and I started to train together, and now she's going to introduce to you what she brings to the table. So very happy to have Sam Batchelor involved with the Direct Action brand and training philosophy.
Awesome, thanks Randy. So yeah, Randy just mentioned that we've been working together for my personal MMA training. So yeah, a little over a year ago, I decided that the next avenue of interest that I wanted to pursue for myself in terms of performance was MMA training. I've always been an athlete, but I kind of needed that next thing that I wanted to explore and try to get better at and maybe pursue competition in. So I met Randy through a mutual friend, and we came along at this point in our relationship where Randy had to start being away for various contracts, and he was in a little bit of a jam where he was away from the gym for periods of time without being able to see his clients. And I've been a strength conditioning coach for a number of years, so we kind of had a conversation where, well, if you're away, I'd be more than happy to see your clients. And then that relationship kind of evolved into where we're at now, which is we're sharing the gym essentially, and I get to now work independently here with Randy and start to build kind of my own brand. So about 4 or 5 months ago, I started my own brand, which is called Adaptive State Performance. And the rationale behind that is I've always been a big believer that we're all very adaptive. We all should strive to be a version of ourselves that is constantly capable of adjusting to whatever life throws at us, whether it's physical, mental, societal, whatever it might be, that we should be in a state where we're always ready to adapt and conform to whatever demands are placed on us. And obviously I like working in the performance realm, so putting that all together, I came up kind of with this brand where I still work with athletes, I work with the general population, I do a lot of injury rehab, and I like to kind of do it under this umbrella of the fact that we are all a lot more capable than we give ourselves credit for, and I want us all to try and be in that kind of state. So yeah, Randy and I now, we work together often and we get to share this space, and I'm super grateful to have this opportunity. And obviously you guys know a lot about Randy and what Randy does and what his expertise is, and our kind of styles complement each other very, very well. So Randy obviously has a ton of experience and a wealth of knowledge in certain domains, and I don't have that experience or knowledge when it comes to things like MMA, because obviously Randy's my coach. So I get to learn from Randy, and then I get to work with my clients on the things that are kind of unrelated, but at the end of the day, our goal for both of us is to help people be the best versions of themselves possible, and to make sure that everybody's living a healthy life, that they're getting better, that we're strong, that we're always prepared for whatever comes next. So that's kind of the backstory on how I got to know Randy and where we're at right now.
Awesome, thanks. That's a great introduction, Sam. And for those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, pay attention to what's going on with the link. We're going to keep this material going, because what we realize is we have some great conversations, and I'm learning as much from Sam as she is from me. We have some great mat chat conversations, and we thought not too long ago, we thought, man, we should be recording this, and we should kind of be sharing this, because there is a lot of knowledge that we're sharing amongst ourselves, but it's unfair to not share that with you, the viewers, and other people that might have similar interests or questions that are down the realms and the topics that we're going to talk about moving forward. So this is awesome. Today is kind of the first stab at it. Like, call us a podcast, call us a couple people just chatting, and whatever you want to put a title onto it, as long as you're tuning in, you're learning something from it, then both Sam and I are happy to provide. So thanks for tuning in. Any questions that you have, just leave them in the comments block below, and we'll address it as the time goes. So with that being said, today the topic of conversation, we're gonna dive down, and where this is driven from is every now and again I'll get emails, or I'll get Instagram posts, messages, personal messages, etc., just random questions. As people are starting to understand that I have a background in special forces. I spent 16 years as a JTF2 assaulter, and before that I was an infantry soldier. A lot of questions come from guys that are interested in going down the military road. And a lot of questions come from guys who are competitive mixed martial arts athletes, which is awesome because these are the two fields that I really like talking about. And it's awesome having Sam on board as well, because she can give maybe a different perspective, and she can also give an educated insight on the strengths and benefits of the topic for today is the use of performance enhancing drugs. So we're gonna dive into it. We'll keep this conversation, maybe 45 minutes max. And again, any questions you guys have, put them in the comments box and we'll address them. All right, Sam. So the email, one email in particular that I received from a young gentleman. He's 21 years old. He's dabbling with some amateur MMA right now, and he's very interested in employment with the Canadian Armed Forces, specifically with employment with JTF2. His question was very pointed and very direct, and he asked me, based on my experience, how many guys have I worked with in the past who are open about using drugs, performance enhancing drugs specifically, and is there any benefit to it? So this is kind of a two-part question, and I'd love your insight. One from a sport perspective, we can talk about the use of performance enhancing drugs, and then one from employment with a profession that has high demand, high consequence, high performing flavor, which an organization like JTF2 very much does. So with that being said, the question is essentially, what are my thoughts on performance enhancing drugs? Well, I would say there's definitely some pros and definitely some cons. And me personally, I want to be completely transparent. I've considered the use of drugs in the past. I have never used performance enhancing drugs. I have used supplements such as creatine, protein, glutamine, stuff like that, but I can honestly say I've never used performance enhancing drugs, nor will I. And my perspective on it is long-term effects, projected longevity, and the effects that consuming stuff like that will have on other organs of your body, your cognitive function, your pituitary glands, your immune system, your liver, your et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to extend this question to Sam and ask, from somebody that's got a lot of background in helping others, have you ever had this conversation with any of your athletes, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I attended the University of Ottawa, and I took a 4-year undergrad in Bachelor of Science specializing in human kinetics, and I can honestly say that we barely touched on performance enhancing drugs. We did talk a lot about obviously the body's systems and how hormones are regulated and lots of things in that realm. And through my own interest in learning about these subjects, I've picked up some knowledge along the way. I definitely wouldn't consider myself an expert by any means in this, but I think I have enough knowledge to contribute a little bit to this conversation, especially because I've talked to a lot of my athletes who either themselves have considered this or they know people who are taking performance enhancing drugs. And like Randy said, myself, I've never taken anything, but then again, everybody's kind of taken a performance enhancing drug at some point, because creatine is a performance enhancing drug, very common, buy it over the counter. Caffeine is a performance enhancing drug, possibly one of the most potent that most people consume on a daily basis. So there are a couple things that most people have used, possibly unknowingly, that will enhance their performance. Those ones are pretty obviously low key, like they're not very intense, they're not going to have any, we don't think, like long-term effects on your health. But then you start to think about things like SARMs, you think about things like testosterone. There's so many things out there. You could look it up for hours and hours and hours on Google, and you would never run out of things to search. And you would never run out of information or studies to look at. I actually recently had some younger clients of mine who are teenagers tell me that their friends in high school are using SARMs, and they're not trying to perform for a position in a military sector. They're just trying to get jacked at the gym. But these teenagers, they're boys who are taking these drugs, they don't care at all about the consequences, because in this moment they're getting huge.
Yeah, the most important thing for them right now is looking good.
Is looking great, and they do, and they get jacked, and they're shredded, and they have low body fat percentage, and they feel awesome, and they're lifting a ton of weights. But down the line, what is that doing to your hormonal systems?
Right.
So that long-term consequence is so important to think about, especially if you're somebody who's young. And your client who emailed, he's 21.
Yeah.
You're still developing at 21 years old, especially as a male. Like, you're not going to be done developing until your late 20s, right? When you're starting to hit your peak. So you have to think, first of all, are there regulations for JTF2, for example? Like, are you allowed to be taking any performance enhancing drugs?
So that's one of those areas that it doesn't get talked about a lot, and it's not tested. Like, it's not tested in the military whether or not you're on some sort of testosterone enhancing drug or whatnot. And I know for a fact there's guys who I've worked with in the past who are using either human growth hormone or some sort of testosterone reproductive therapy they're involved in, and they have their reasons for it. Some guys they have been banged up, serious accidents, or major surgeries, so they're trying to get themselves back into. They're trying to reach what they were before their injury, so they're trying to find a fast forward button to get back to where they were. Those are their reasons. Some guys are maybe misguided with their reasoning, where I've had conversations with guys and they compare themselves to a guy that maybe they worked with in the past from our American counterparts, so maybe a member from SEAL Team 6 or a Delta guy, and they're comparing themselves in relation to a deadlift, for example. And I've actually had this conversation with a guy who I highly respect at the unit, and he's talking about using TRT. Now, mind you, he was early 30s when I had this conversation, and I asked him, for what reason are you looking for TRT? And he said, well, man, I was working with this guy from Delta, and he's deadlifting 375 pounds, and I want to up my PR in deadlift. I thought, what does that have to do with anything in terms of performing your job and doing your job really well? Absolutely nothing. That is 100% driven by ego. It's driven by your own, whatever it might be, and not to offend anybody, but your own insecurities. And I don't think that's a reason. In fact, I firmly believe that's not a reason that you should go down the realm of TRT, for example. Now, this is a bit of it's a complex subject, but I've also had conversations with guys that are looking for a supplement to help them out, where they're trying to have kids and maybe their T is low, and they can't figure out why they're not able to connect the dots and procreate. And they're maybe having conversations with the doctor about TRT, and one way or another, if they're committed, they're going to do it. They're going to find a way around the system, or they're going to find the help that they need to do it. The concern that I have for those guys is, I get it. I respect the fact you want to have a baby. I get it. But let's back it up a little bit. And you and I talked a little bit before we started to roll the camera about some of the basic fundamentals that we can apply. For an example, really be honest with yourself. Are you sleeping well? Not just enough sleep, but is it quality sleep? That could have an effect on your T. Are you eating well? Are you, crushing 3 or 4 pints a night? Are you eating, junk food on a consistent basis? That's going to have an effect on your ability to procreate. It's going to have an effect on your testosterone levels. It's going to have an effect on the way that you perform. So back to the question, and it's a long-winded loop to come back to the question. Is it illegal in the Canadian Armed Forces? To my knowledge, I've been retired now for a couple of years. It's not illegal, but it's also not regulated, right? So it's kind of one of those gray areas where if a guy really feels like he needs to take SARMs or he needs to take some sort of PEDs in order to get to that next level, I would caution the guy, because the reality is this, and I'm a firm believer, there's no substitution for hard work. If you want to become a member of the Special Forces, you need to put in the effort, and you need to earn it. You need to work for it. If you're cheating yourself, and that's really what it is, by convincing yourself you need that edge by taking some sort of enhancement drug, then you're really not giving it your all. You're really not putting in the work. You're really not doing extra. And Sam and I had this conversation before, and some viewers and followers, you probably heard me say it. I truly believe what separates a contender from a champion is champions are willing to do extra. And that's what makes the difference. It's not, what drug you're taking or what that, that over-the-counter purchase you're making to get to that next level, in my opinion. So, so to bring it back, it's not, to my knowledge, it's not illegal, but it's not regulated.
Right. And you made some really good points there. Like, you're almost taking a shortcut if you're not looking at those pillars of health, the fundamentals that everybody should make sure that they're addressing before they start looking for the next step. So sleep is a huge one. It's humongous. I don't know the exact percentages and all that stuff off the top of my head, but there's countless studies that show If you're not getting this amount of sleep, if you're not, spending this much time in REM or whatever it might be, that's a metric of sleep, you are certainly decreasing your testosterone. Are you mastering your sleep first before you look at that external stimulus of TRT? Are you eating well? Are you exercising? Are you managing your stress? Are you hydrated? Are you training? A lot of people may not be training to their fullest potential, but looking for something that will make their training better. So you have to make sure that you're covering all your bases first without looking for the shortcuts, because at the end of the day, there aren't any shortcuts for hard work, like you said.
100%.
You have to cover all those bases first.
And there's a study I read, it was a couple of years ago, and I believe it was released by, it was a Harvard University study, and it had to do with resistance training. And the study suggested that for men between the ages of 30 and 35, resistance training, so lifting heavy weights and doing that, with a scheduled, organized approach, will help not increase your testosterone, but will help delay the testosterone drop that we do experience when we're into our 40s. So what it's suggesting is, if you're in your 30s and you're not incorporating resistance training already, 2 to 3 times a week is what is recommended. It's going to help level out the curve so you don't hit that drop when you are into your 40s with the testosterone. So it was a really good article. There was some great background, and a lot of different athletes had an opportunity to pipe in. So when I read it, I thought, man, that's it's a really simple fix where maybe the individual doesn't have to go down that realm of reproduction therapy.
Mm-hmm. And you have to be honest with yourself too. Like, are you doing everything that you can do possibly to maximize your existing hormones, to maximize your existing performance before you search out something else? Like, at the end of the day, even if you do take a performance enhancing drug, maybe it's testosterone, whatever it might be, is it really going to take you further than if you had just covered all your bases and done everything right to begin with? And if you were to stop taking that, are you now going to revert back to just your existing quality of performance, because that was an artificial inflation, an artificial inflator of how you're performing? And considering as well that a lot of the effects that you're going to receive are temporary, but down the line, maybe you can't take that drug forever. So if you're trying, for example, if you're 21 years old and you want to get into this position where you need to be a extremely high performer, maybe after 10 years, you actually are starting to decrease in your performance because you've been taking these drugs for 10 years, but you want to stay in the unit for another 10 years. So what are those last 10 years of your career going to look like? Are you going to go from being one of the highest performers because something helped you to being one of the lowest performers because you also used it as a crutch? So then is half of your career not great because you had that help, that boost at the beginning, and now you don't know how to have that yourself internally? Like, maybe you don't have to have the same mentality because you have that external physical boost from the drug, and then you can't manifest that same performance just from yourself. Like, you're cheating yourself, and you're cheating your teammates, and if it's a sport, or you're cheating your guys in the unit that you're with on your team, because now you're not the same person when you don't have that external stimulus.
And I would pile on to that, and I would say you have to at least consider, you're absolutely right, consider the other guys around you. Because, for an example, if you've become that tactical athlete who relies on a performance enhancing drug, and then you find yourself deployed in a foreign country at short notice, and maybe you didn't have time to prepare and prep that 4 or 6 month dose of drug that you required, then now your body it's longing for it. It's now starting to function inadequately because of that lack of drug that you've enhanced throughout the months leading up to that deployment. So think about it from the perspective of the people around you. Can you be combat effective without the requirement of an external factor? And at the beginning, when you're trying to for JTF2, I know there are a lot of attributes that you're being tested, and really the assessment of what you bring to the table. And one of the key assessments and one of the key contributing factors in terms of attributes that they're looking for is guys that are self-motivated. So being able to look deep inside and say, yes, I can do what it takes. I'm willing to go the extra step. I'm willing to do the extra work without a crutch, without the external factor that's going to help you get there. So consider the decisions that you're making, especially at such a young age. Consider the decisions that you're making now will have, not maybe, they're going to have an effect. Maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years down the road, there's going to be an effect, and we can't guarantee that it's going to be a positive effect. So what I would suggest for guys that are considering is, you know, like Sam said, have you exhausted all other options? If you haven't, then talk to a medical professional and give them the straight goods and get that clinical medical professional opinion that's going to help you basically be a better version of yourself.
Yeah, and we do know that with TRT, your body will rely on it. So if you're taking something like TRT for an extended period of time, as soon as you stop, your body no longer knows how to produce testosterone itself the way that it used to. So especially when you're somebody young, whether you think you want to have kids or not, whether you don't, like you think you're going to do this one career for the rest of your life, or you want to change it, you are absolutely impacting your longevity when it comes to your hormonal regulation when you take things like this. And I was looking up some things about SARMs recently, and they don't have a ton of data on SARM long-term use right now, but they do know that it failed preclinical trials because it was causing cancer, and it was so dangerous that they stopped the trials. So when there's no long-term data, it's almost always a sign that it's probably not something you should be taking long-term. Right. You know, until there's more data, like you definitely want to be really careful there.
And you know, and I'll go back to the beginning of this talk, and I'll be honest with you, I considered it. In fact, there's a clinic right here in Ottawa who I reached out to. I was still fighting professionally, but I was struggling to recover, and I was still operating and still working full time at the unit, and I was fighting. So the last couple of years, my fighting career was not ideal. I was fighting for all the wrong reasons, and we can talk about that maybe on another day. But I want to stay on tack with what we're talking about today. So when I considered it, what I felt was I wasn't recovering as quickly as I was used to. And what was concerning is I was fighting guys, like for an example, my last 3 professional fights, I fought a guy that was 10, 12, and 14 years younger than me. Those are factors. Those are factors because those guys recover really, really quickly, you know, and this is part of nature, man. This is the way we're built. And what my concern was not necessarily how I was going to perform inside the cage, but it was getting through the training, because I would work full time every day. I'd be at work from 8 until 4, and then I would go to the gym from 6 until 9. And then try to, sleep it and get a quality sleep that night, and then do it again the next day. I would do that 4, 5, 6 days a week, and I was constantly getting sick. I was always run down. I was not performing well at work. It had a negative effect. I was not performing well when I was on the mat training for MMA. So to me, there was a problem. And the problem I was trying to fix with the consideration of TRT. So when I reached out to this clinic here in Ottawa, they were awesome. I chatted with them on the phone for about 45 minutes, and the gentleman that I spoke with, very, very, very educated, and was not trying to sell the product. In fact, the opposite. He tried to talk me out of it, and in fact, he did. And one of the big things that he talked about was once you committed to TRT, you're on that for life. If that's the lifestyle that you wish to try to sustain. So he talked me off the ledge, so to speak. And I'm happy that he did, because that was the one and only time that I considered it, and I'm glad that I didn't follow through with it. Now, to go back just a step when it comes to the military, there's guys that are legitimately dealing with some stuff, and I think now might be the time just to touch on it just a little bit, but we can talk in depth maybe at another time. But the use of drugs, SARMs or testosterone, whatever it might be, is in some cases the members' desperate view or desperate way to try to fix something that they're dealing with. Hopefully the message that you take away today is try to exhaust all other options before you go down that realm, because once you do go down that realm, it is very, from what I've read and what I've studied and what I understand, the conversations I've had with people who have way more knowledge than I, it is very difficult to come back from that. So I would say, if you're considering it, let it be like the last ditch effort. Let it be the thing that you've tried everything else before you consider taking that path.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you even think about something like the Olympics, all these people are the best of the best. They're the elite of the elite at their given sport, and it's not allowed to use anything, right? But people always still try. And there's been things like when Russia was secretly doping their athletes and things like this, and it's a crazy story, but even those people are the elite of the elite, and they are still just striving for that like little bit of 1%. Are you, like the person considering if you want to take PEDs, are you the elite of yourself first before you start looking for that extra like little 1% or whatever percentage it might give you? And it just makes me think as well about like the playing field. Like sometimes an argument that's made about these performance enhancing drugs is, well, what if just everyone took them?
Yeah.
Because then it's a level playing field. It's not like you're cheating or you have a leg up on somebody else. If everyone's taking them, then it's much more fair.
Yeah.
So isn't everyone just going to be better? So I've heard the argument that maybe every member of the military should just be taking them, so that they can be the best versions of themselves possible. And I can see that argument for sure, and I'm sure everybody would become better to a degree, but at some point there's still going to be individual differences. Like some people will respond better to the drugs than others. Some people may get positive benefits, some people may only get negative benefits. Like, is it a game that you're willing to play with all of these people? For
profession of arms, I would say absolutely not, because if the body reacts as a very specific way when, for example, no bullshit, when bullets are flying in both directions and you need to make crucial decisions right now, if you are, you fall victim to being combat ineffective because of the use of whatever drugs you're pumping into your body, then who benefits?
Yeah.
Nobody. You're letting your buddies down, you're letting yourself down, you're letting the mission down. Nobody benefits from that. So why even risk that? Like, personally speaking, I wouldn't roll the dice in that perspective. And then to bring it back to the sports side, I've had this conversation with some BJJ practitioners who I have the great opportunity to work with on a regular basis, high-level competitors. And I know for a fact, because some of them are open and some of them because I didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday, when they're using it, right? So you just know these things. When you're around sport long enough, when you're around alpha males long enough, you can just tell when behaviors change and things change and body types change. You don't have to lie about it, man. It's pretty obvious. And suggesting that it's because I'm eating 6,000 and 7,000 and 8,000 calories a day. Come on, man. You don't put on 15 pounds in 6 months eating 7,000 calories a day. You just don't. Anyway, I digress. So those high-level athletes, I've had the conversation with them, and they say the exact same thing, Sam. Well, man, I need to take the PEDs because I know that high-level competitor I'm probably going to face in the gold medal match. He's taking them. Like, okay. So let me pose this question to you. Wouldn't you feel more proud of yourself by taking him down, knowing that he's using and you're not?
Yeah, right? That's huge.
Like, man, no one can take that from you. No one will ever take that from you. So being able to step in there, and choke somebody out, and at the end have your hand raised, knowing that he tried everything to cheat the system, if you will, but your obligation to yourself was to keep you pure, man, I think you would have so much more pride wearing that gold medal around your neck.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day too, a lot of this comes down to what is your goal. And we didn't touch on this yet, but I'll bring it up now, is there's a lot of research going on with people who are retiring out of the military, who are using things like TRT for recovery purposes from things like TBIs. There's a huge, just absolutely exploding area of research where people who have had TBIs have just their testosterone, everything is just plummeted. And when they treat them with hormone replacement therapy, it improves so many of their not just physical and physiological symptoms, but also psychological issues that they're starting to have once they're out of their military service. And that is totally different than what we were just talking about.
Yeah. Using
it for that purpose, especially because I'm assuming that means you're kind of later in life too,
right,
is humongous. If that guarantees that you won't have a post-traumatic stress injury, or you might not have depression, or you may be able to actually sleep. Like maybe you can't sleep because your T is so low and it's causing so many issues with your physiology. Like then it's, people are more on board then. You should definitely do something because it's going to help, because you can't address the pillars.
Right.
Like if you don't have any drive, any energy, if you can't sleep, if you can't eat, and you have no way to address the other pillars that we talked about, like training, resistance training is huge, or maybe you're not eating well because, you know, the appetite is non-existent because of whatever is going on with your current hormones, then yeah, that would be a much better time for you to use those hormones, right?
I think, you know, there's pros and cons to every decision that we make. There's, you know, there's positive and negative consequences no matter what the situation is. I guess the question would have to be for those, especially, I mean, we're addressing this one gentleman's question. He's 21 years old. And if, you know, if you're in this realm, if you're in this area, then maybe it applies to you and maybe not. Because like Sam's suggesting, if you're at the end of a career, you've driven the body hard, you know, a lot of strain on the body, a lot of strain on the mind, but you're getting close to the end of a career. Sometimes, you know, speaking from experience, those who have served in uniform, have a hard time transitioning to the next chapter of our life because we feel like a lost identity or a new identity is being created, but we're just not sure how to create that identity. And sometimes to get us maybe into the next positive chapter of our life, the use of, you know, controlled substance may be the thing that gets you into a positive space. So that's a good thing. Where I would err on the side of caution is if you're a young man, you know, between the ages of 21 and 35, I would caution you heavily if you're considering the use of really pumping anything that's going to affect the outcome of your overall DNA. Now, I do want to just talk about one more thing before we summarize. And Sam, you know, when it comes to performance enhancing supplements, right? So, you know, I've been open about it, the use of creatine on a pretty regular basis. There has been some studies that have indicated the use of creatine, sipping on, you know, creatine throughout the day does help with, you know, some issues, mild traumatic brain injury issues that have been exposed in the past. So if there is a supplement that you can buy over the counter that has been regulated and controlled and vetted by, reliable sources, would you encourage an athlete using some of these supplements?
Yeah, like I've worked with a lot of teenagers in my career so far, and a lot of them have asked me about creatine because it is so readily available. Obviously, a lot of them are also, you know, having protein. They're obviously having caffeine, and maybe they're doing some other things that I don't know about. But creatine is definitely one of the questions that I get a lot from these athletes, and I approach that conversation the same way we've approached this conversation, which is make sure you're doing everything else right first, because you will hit a ceiling with all of the things that you should be making sure you're kind of creating the foundation of your performance and your health with, and then look at that option. But even then, you want to make sure that you're not using it as a crutch, like we talked about too. Like, don't assume that because you're taking creatine, you no longer need to focus on, you know, eating enough protein, or you no longer need to actually do some like recovery routines and have some recovery habits that you're also employing in your training regimen, so that you don't just assume, okay, well, I'm taking creatine, so I've heard that creatine, you know, it gives me like a little bit of extra muscle mass, and you know, it just makes me look a little bit bigger, and it gives me a little bit more energy at the beginning of my performance. So maybe I don't need to worry about the other things as much. I think that that's something that people tend to do, is they're like, oh, I have this, so I don't have to do that.
Right.
So I think as long as you don't develop that unfortunate mindset of, I have this, so I don't need to do that, then I think creatine's a relatively safe thing that you could be taking. I did read though that it may not be as great for teenagers as like young adults. I can't remember exactly what the rationale was behind that, but obviously you're still developing, right? When you're a teenager and into your young 20s and even late 20s, depending on the person. But yeah, it's a relatively safe one. There's obviously so many brands out there, and if you're an athlete that's tested, or a performer that's tested for your job or whatever it might be, then you would really want to make sure you're picking a brand that's third-party tested and approved for sport, because there's a lot of contamination, and you never really know the quality or exactly what you're getting when you pick something off of Amazon versus, you know, you're going to a very reputable source. So I think as long as you're checking all those boxes, then creatine is definitely a very safe and effective, obviously, supplement.
And you know, and I agree with you. Remember that it's a supplement. It's not a replacement,
Yeah.
right? So like, you know, creatine, yeah, it's proven beneficial in, you know, maybe young adults, more so the teenagers. However, I truly, you know, believe that nothing will replace, you know, a healthy, balanced diet. So, you know, eating whole foods, eating, you know, high quality foods, you know, getting a decent amount of quality recovery. Those are going to be factors that are going to help you perform optimally on a daily basis. So, awesome. All right. In that summary, you know, performance enhancing drugs, it's a very complex subject for sure. I really appreciate Sam's feedback. Again, as always, please leave any comments or questions that you have in the comments box below, and we'll keep this going. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us for this particular conversation. And I want to thanks again to Sam. Welcome her aboard. And anything that you guys have with regard to training questions, anything at all, you know, please feel free to reach out to myself and Sam, and we'll address them. Thanks, guys.